and I was so hyper focused on the World Economic Forum and what they were doing. I have to ask you: has the World Economic Forum been sacrificed? Did we win? Because it kind of went to the wayside, but I know they're not gone. Klaus Schwab was
Sure, of course
exposed.
they're not.
Right, they're not gone.
Hmm.
So have they just mutated? Is somebody else taking their place? Did they pass the torch? What is happening?
Yeah, so I would argue let's go back to what the WEF is by its own description. It's the premier promoter of the public-private partnership. So I think a lot of the policies that they attempt to sell people through the public sector, i.e. governments, was exposed. And I think they've gone to the other side of the public-private partnership, and are trying to market some of their policies that are unpopular with significant segments, particularly in the West, via the private sector. I would.
Can you give me
I think
examples?
that's what's happening. Yeah, so I guess one example would be, let's take what's happening in Britain, for example, with the so-called BritCard and digital ID. So obviously there's been a lot of political pushback to that. From Keir Starmer, his intention to frame this as a way to solve illegal immigration, which is absolutely a
Madness.
ludicrous
Yeah,
idea.
madness.
Yeah, yeah, completely insane. And so, and then they of course come out and said that soon, it wasn't just limited to its use as an alleged work permit; it would expand to all facets of life. But actually, if you look at how the UN has labeled or has sort of laid out the its plan really to have digital ID implemented at a global scale, it's not to have it be a centralized digital ID like the BritCard has been proposed. Instead, it's meant to be a vendor agnostic system whereby you would have different vendors sell a digital ID type of platform. And so to the public would see it as decentralized and all these different private sector partners in digital ID that they have the illusion of choice between them. But really, all that data is meant to be interoperable. And so that it can all be harvested off of any of these, different digital ID platforms and collated in a mass in a single database. Because ultimately, if you were to have something like BritCard, for example, happen, you would have all of the data be harvested into a single library, what Tony Blair's Institute, for example, calls the National Data Library.
Hmm.
Something like that. So you could have that happen with Keir Starmer's BritCard or something else that it comes from, I don't know, five or six different companies offering different forms of digital ID, but all of that data could still be harvested, from all of those different vendors because they all agree to specific standards. And if you look at some of these alliances about digital ID that were a focus during COVID, for example, like the ID 2020 Alliance, for example, they were all about getting all these different vendors of digital ID to agree to the same set of international standards so that they could harvest the data from any digital ID, no matter who makes it, and have it held in the same global centralized database. So there are different ways to get what they ultimately want, but it all comes down to public perception. So a colleague of mine who I've worked with closely on digital ID for a few years now, Ian Davis, recently wrote about what's going on in the UK, and he's based there. And he posited that maybe what Keir Starmer is doing is actually a bait and switch, that to create
Mm.
all this unpopularity about this style of digital ID, but then someone later could come in riding the wave of the discontent that this is creating and then offer a new solution, which would be more along the lines of what I just described, which is actually how the UN itself and SDG 16, which is the SDG that includes digital ID, the roadmap laid out there is not the same as the one laid out by Keir Starmer. So in that, you still have a public-private partnership, right? But it would be the private leading as opposed to the public leading. And what we're seeing come out of the UK right now is being sold as a public leading thing, and it's grossly unpopular. And I think they're a lot smarter than people give them credit for. I mean, they're fundamentally very manipulative, and they want us to get stuck with the same policy, but they're very apt at selling it different ways, and they know that they've become very unpopular with large segments of the population. And so, like a chameleon, they have to take a different form, but ultimately the goal is to lead people to the same type of, technocratic Orwellian system.